Marhaba, Ivar Bash. How is everyone doing today? I believe folks are muted. uh, Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining today. Thanks, Patricia, for the wonderful introduction. I'm getting some feedback. Is everyone able to hear me clearly? Wonderful. And Patricia, are we also able to see my screen right now? Okay, wonderful.
I think we have a
Awesome.
young participant joining us, which is great, but I'm going to mute you.
Lovely. That's awesome. I'm really excited with the enthusiasm around the presentation. Um, Thanks everyone for joining, and thank you, Patricia, for that wonderful introduction. My name is Ramki, and as Patricia was saying, I'm currently working for Starbucks, based out of Seattle in United States. And I'm here to share my experiences and possibly like walk through an approach in terms of how do we go about solving for a problem by keeping our customers' preference as a primary factor in mind. Uh, I know it's almost Wednesday for all of you. It's almost getting to the end of the week and it's evening. So I really appreciate your patience sitting through this presentation. And what I would request is that let's make this fun and interactive. The last thing I want to do is to bore you with a 90 minutes presentation. So let's make this interactive, fun, and make sure that we are all having a good time as part of this session. Um, so a bit of background about myself before jumping into the contents of the topic today. I just wanted to briefly walk you through who I am, what's my background, and where do I come from, so that you have an appreciation for uh, what I bring in, and also possibly ask questions related to my experience that I can try and answer. So a bit of introduction. I was born in India, in the southernmost state called Kerala. It's a small state. It's very it's very beautiful, very green. I was born in '79, and I have a very interesting and a very early connection with Iraq. So the first 2 years of my life after I was born, I actually spent in Iraq, and that's because my father was working in this place called Iskandaria in Iraq, which is roughly 70 kilometers south of Baghdad. He was working for an automotive company there, and he took me and my mom along. And my first 2 years were spent in Iraq. So Iraq holds a very deep place in my heart, and I think I have a personal connection with all of you that way. um, so after the first 2 years, these are some pictures of my early times in Iraq. You can see me with my dad and my mom there. Um, Subsequently, we came back to India because, as all of us are aware, there was a long drawn war between Iraq and Iran, and that forced us to come back to India. And from 81 to 92, I spent much of my time in India, and my dad got an opportunity in Kuwait, and I had the opportunity to go do my high school in Kuwait from 92 to 95. Um, this was an interesting phase in my life because until then I was pretty much confined to a very small town in India. I did not have much of an exposure, and Kuwait was a very multicultural place. You have 70% of the population in Kuwait roughly is uh, from people from other sides of the world. They are not people native to Kuwait. And there's also a lot of diversity. Like you have people from India, Philippines, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and variety of countries. So it was a very good exposure in terms of just getting to know different cultures, getting to know the people, their background, and just was a good experience overall. Subsequently, I did my graduation from 97 to 2001. I specialized in information technology. I did my graduation back in India, and 2001 was when I started working. So 2001, 2001 to 2007, the early days of my career, I was a hands-on engineer developing software products. So much of my early years from a professional life was spent on designing enterprise solutions for some of the leading clients around the world, especially in Europe. So I had an opportunity early years of my life to early years of my professional life to really travel around to places like Thailand, Sweden, Austria, and UK, mainly for these work assignments. And that was also a very good exposure to kind of get to know people and also learn a lot as part of my professional life too. I took a small break in my career in 2007 and did my master's in management from Singapore. And 2008 to 2015, I again, after finishing my master's, I came back to work. This year's, the later stage of my professional life from 2008 to 2015, I was primarily consulting for a lot of retailers in and around US. So my responsibility at this phase of my career was to really help define e-commerce solutions and flush out the requirements, understand the customer journey, and really help through the implementation to see the product all the way to life. I also had an opportunity to work for Amazon from 2015 to 16, where I was a product manager on their seller services division. And my role primarily catered to developing a platform where the third-party sellers in Amazon.com could bring and sell their products. So that was, again, a very good exposure. And since 2016, as Patricia was highlighting, I've been working for Starbucks as a principal product manager based in Seattle. And a lot of what I do for Starbucks revolves around developing features and supporting those features for their iOS, Android, and the web platform. So that's a summary of who I am, where I come from, and a lot of my exposure is related to developing digital products, be it e-commerce or mobile-related products for different clients. So that's just a gist of my background. Now, is everyone able to follow along, hear me clearly? Are we good so far?
I think so. I can hear you well, so hopefully everyone else can as well. Yep, we're getting yeses in the chat box.
Wonderful. Awesome. Just wanted to make sure. Awesome. Let's get started with the content of the presentation. So I'm really excited to talk to all of you because what you are up onto is a very interesting journey in terms of really taking an idea and bringing it all the way to life. And to me, this relates a lot like watching a movie where you don't know what the climax is, you don't know how it's going to end. You just enjoy the process, go through it. There's going to be ups and downs, and eventually you get to something really beautiful and something really helpful that for people, your customers, and for your community around you. So everything starts with a wonderful idea. That's a famous quote, and that applies in this scenario too. That's just a funny cartoon on someone trying to get to a good idea. Just wanted to lighten it up a bit. So everything starts with an idea, and ideas are really powerful. No matter how simple or complex an idea is, the ideas have the power to change the world. A lot of big companies that we are familiar with today have started with very small ideas. So just wanted to do a quick pulse or a quick quizzer here, like just in terms of whether you're familiar with some of these companies, and if not, it's totally okay. I just wanted to understand. So these are how some of the companies have evolved from an idea standpoint. So there is this company which started with a simple idea that, hey, we will have a computer in every desk around the world. Any guesses what this company could be potentially? A lot of the desktop and the computers you use are attributed or came from this company originally. Any clues or guesses there? we are talking about Microsoft. That's the company that we are all familiar with, that started with this simple idea. Another company wanted to really organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful for everyone. So this the company that started with the simple idea turned out to be Google, as we know today, which everyone relies on to search for any kind of information that they want to know more about. The third and the final example, there was this company that wanted to make transportation very easy and simple, like running water for everyone, everywhere. And this company is what we know as Uber today. So essentially, the reason I wanted to have this slide is that every company at some stage or the other has started from a very simple idea and has evolved into the big companies that we know of them as of today. So ideas are powerful. Ideas have the power to touch people's lives. Ideas have the power to change communities, and ideas have the power to really impact the world. So all of that is to underline the fact that you are on a very exciting journey. There could be ups and downs, but trust in your ideas, trust in the power of your ideas, and it's all going to turn out wonderful eventually. Any questions?
Ramki, sorry to interrupt. I think there's some people are having problems seeing or hearing. So I'm going to just type up your high level points in the chat box. So if it disconnects, just for everyone to just check the chat box, and I'll type in the main points so we can follow along.
Oh, okay. I'll try to increase my volume just in case that could help.
I think it's more technical difficulties on people's end, because I think most people can hear you, but sometimes maybe Zoom is acting up.
Okay, got it. I also wanted to kind of, along the lines of bringing an idea to life, just present a simple story. This is about a company called Airbnb. It stands for Air, Bed, and Breakfast. This company, I don't think this company is launched in Iraq or Kurdistan as yet, but it's something that's prominent in US and some of the other parts of the world. So what this company does is that it provides short-term accommodations. So say, for example, you want to travel from one place to another, and you want to stay at the place that you are traveling to. So how this works is that you go to Airbnb site, airbnb.com. You look up at what are all the possible accommodations in the place that you're traveling to, and you can find those accommodations in the site and make a booking so that you can stay in that accommodation. And on the other side of the site, there are also people, say for example, you have a house or you have an apartment that you can rent out to people visiting to your city. You can also do that. So this works much like a two-sided system where there are people who put out their house or accommodation up for stay, and there are also people who would book those accommodations or those houses for stay when they are visiting those places. So that's what this company does. It's called Air, Bed, and Breakfast, Airbnb. This company today is one of the largest provider of accommodations in the world. It's much bigger than any of the hotel chains that we can think of. It's got its presence in close to 200 countries in the world. There are close to 6 million properties in terms of apartments, houses, or even some of the bigger fancy estates that are put up, that are listed on the site and are available for booking. And close to 2 million people stay at this Airbnb Airbnb provided accommodations every night. So all of that is to highlight the scale of this company and what an important role it is playing to make the travel very friendly and helpful for people. This company started from a very simple concept. So I know there's a lot of information on this slide, and what I can do is to just summarize that. and walk you through how the story of how Airbnb started. So the company was started by two people called Brian and Joe. They were good friends. They were staying in the city called San Francisco, and they were staying together in an apartment. And what happened is that their landowner, I'm getting some feedback. Am I still audible?
Yes, we can hear you. I'll make sure everybody's muted, Ramki.
Thanks, Patricia. So what happened was that Brian and Joe, they were staying in an apartment, and they were staying on rent, right? And they were still trying to think about what is a product or a company that they can launch, what are some ideas they can go after. So they were at the early stages of their career, and suddenly their landowner increased the price of their apartment, and they no longer could provide the rent for that apartment. So they came up with this simple idea where, hey, like, we have an apartment, there is some space available in the apartment. What if we let out this space for some people who are traveling to our city? So they created this simple site called Airbnb.com, and listed their apartment in the site to say, hey, like, if anyone is traveling to San Francisco, we have our apartment available for a short stay for 2 nights, and you can use our space, and we'll also make sure that you have a good experience as part of staying with us. So hello?
Yeah. We can hear you, Ramki. I've muted everybody.
Okay. So what ended up happening was that there were 3 people who found this site. They got interested with this. They got interested with the offer, and they ended up visiting Joe and Brian's apartment, and they stayed with them for 2 nights. And as part of this stay, Brian and Joe also took them around the city. They showed them what San Francisco is like. They got introduced they introduced them to the culture of the city and the people around the city, and it turned out to be a very nice experience. And that's when it occurred to them that, hey, like, this idea is powerful. Like, we could possibly scale this idea up. So once those guests left them, they expanded the site and again launched it as part of launched it in 2008. So in 2008, there was a presidential election happening in US, and there was a big conference that was happening in a small town. And what ended up happening is that all the hotels were booked up. There was no longer any accommodation available in that small city. And that was the perfect time when this site was scaled up and launched by these founders. And what the site did was that it provided an alternate avenue for people who are visiting that city to make an accommodation where they, instead of staying in big hotels that they were used to, they could now stay in small apartments or stay along with some of the people who are already residing in that city. And that was a big success. So that inspired them to further join an incubator program, just like how all of you are doing today. They joined an incubator program called Y Combinator, where the idea was to understand how they could further improve their site, how they could drive more traffic and make this more useful for their customers. So one of the interesting insights that one of the interesting things that happened when they were in this program was that the mentor in the program asked them to travel around, get close to their customers and really understand what their customers' needs were, and use that information to improve the site. So they traveled extensively. They went to their customers' houses, like the people who are making bookings in Airbnb.com. They actually went to their houses, knocked their doors, introduced themselves, and said, hey, like, we are the founders of this site. We want to have a conversation with you to understand how you can use the site better. And as part of those interactions and conversations, they ended up learning a lot of information about their customers, the way they operate on a day-to-day basis and the way they use their site, that was very, very useful to them. So they use that information based on the customer interaction to come back to their offices, work upon improvements, make iterations, and really make the site a lot more friendly and better for their customers. All of that was possible because they were able to talk to their customers and really understand who their customers were and use that information to make improvements. Eventually, the site became a big success. A lot of people started listing their apartments and houses in the site. A lot of other people started booking those apartments for the short visits. And it became a huge company. The reason I walk through this story is that, this story gives us a good understanding of what it takes to really build a product. What are the challenges that we face along the journey, and how do we overcome that to kind of eventually pursue our goals and make the idea into a success. So some of the takeaways from the story is that any idea starts with a necessity, right? This could be necessity, could be something in terms of, hey, like a problem you are facing as a founder of that company, or a problem that you see is commonly faced by a lot of people around you in your community. So everything starts with a simple necessity, and that necessity sparks an idea, and eventually it gets built as a product. The other key takeaway from the story is that always stay close to your customer, understand who your customers are, get to know them, and base your product on their needs, because eventually your idea can become a success only if it's if it provides value to your customers. So understanding the customer preference is very, very important, and that's the topic of our conversation also today. Keep the solution simple to start with. This is a very important point. A lot of times it's very easy to get distracted with the complexity involved in the solution or the number of information that we gather, but always focus on how can we develop a very simple solution, get feedback from our customers on a constant basis, and use that information to improve the product. Don't waste a lot of time building a complicated product to start with. That's going to be a waste of time, a waste of energy, and waste of your resources. Focus a lot of time on the customer inputs and feedback. Start with a simple product, take it back to your customers, get feedback again, and constantly repeat that process to make improvements, so that you start small and slowly start adding value based on your customer feedback. Get creative and find alternatives. This is very straightforward. Always try to see what's the best way to solve a problem, and if you're not able to find a best way, like try to find all other possibilities on how you can approach it. And the fifth and the final point is success always comes in cycles. Stay persistent. So the entrepreneurial journey, as a lot of you are familiar with, comes with a lot of ups and downs. There could be days where you are very frustrated. There could be days where you're very excited because something is working for you. So stay positive, stay optimistic, and make sure that like understand that you're here to help customers, and you're here to help your communities. So use that inspiration to stay persistent, and success would eventually materialize for you. Any questions or comments so far before we move forward? Are we all following along? Just wanted to make sure you're comfortable so far in the presentation. Okay, I believe I'll take that for a yes, and move along. And at any point you have questions or comments, feel free to stop or interrupt me. Like we can keep this conversational and interesting. So I'm here to answer your questions the best of my ability. So feel free to ask any questions anytime you have a clarification, or even if you want to share some insights or share your experience. I would love to listen to that. So moving along, here is a simple framework for bringing an idea to life, right? So you have an idea, you're passionate about it, you believe your idea can help your customers, help your community, and eventually help you make money. How do you take that idea all the way and build a product around it? So this is a simple 5-step process that outlines that entire cycle of taking an idea and bringing it all the way to life. So step number 1 is ideation. Step number 2 is research. Step number 3 is building a product based on your research. Step number 4 is iteration, where, as we discussed previously, we constantly make improvements to the product by building a very small version of the product, taking it to our customers, getting the feedback, and again making improvements on them. And step 5 is scale, which is how do you add more features to the product and eventually take it from a small product to a bigger product. So we will go through each of these steps. So if there are questions, feel free to jump in. We'll identify how this process works. And what we will do for the sake of simplicity is, rather than just covering the theoretical concepts, we'll also use a small example so that all of us are following along as part of on how this framework. Let's get started. Right? Step number 1 is ideation. What does ideation mean? Ideation means that you have a simple concept or a desire, like you have a simple idea in your mind, and you convert that idea into a pitch. And what does a pitch mean? A pitch means that a pitch is nothing but a brief description of the idea, covers on some of the important elements that we will go through. So basically, this step is about refining your idea into a pitch, or like getting your idea into a pitch format. Let's use a simple example on how this works, right? So, and we will expand on this same example. So follow along this example, and you will be fine at the end of the presentation on the concept. So the example is used to illustrate how this whole framework is put to use. Say idea, and your idea is that you want to design a solution to help the blind people in Pakistan. Say that's your idea, right? The pitch would look something like 1,000 blind in Kurdistan who depend on us for their day-to-day activities. If you help those be independent, it's a business opportunity worth $2 million. That's an example of a pitch. So what we have done is we have started with a simple idea that you want to build a solution to help blind people, and you have actually refined that to make it a pitch with a lot more clarity. So what are the key components of a pitch? Let's use the same example. There are 100,000 people in Kurdistan. What is that? 100,000 blind people in Kurdistan. So that quantifies the size of the problem. What it helps you to do is understand what's the size of the problem you're looking at. The next step is blind people in Kurdistan depend on others for their day-to-day activities, right? Like we're just breaking down the pitch and trying to identify what are the components of each of the what are the components within the pitch. So blind people in Kurdistan depend on others for day-to-day activities. That's clearly the problem space. That's what you're trying to solve for. You follow that further with, if we can help them be independent. So that constitutes to your objective. You want to help them be independent. That's what you're trying to do with your idea. And the final step is, it's a business worth $2 million per annum. That is the opportunity. So look at how we have done this, right? So we have taken a simple idea, we have converted it to a pitch that essentially has 4 components. So it defines what's the size of your problem. It defines what your problem is. It identifies a very high level objective, and then it quantifies that opportunity. So these are the 4 components of a good pitch. There's a problem, there's a size of a problem, there is an objective, and there is an opportunity. So this looks very simple, in a slide, but what a pitch helps you to really do in a real world scenario is that it helps you to think deeper. It helps you to understand who your customers are. It helps you to think deeply on what is the problem you're trying to solve for them. It helps you to get a high level idea of the solution, and it also helps you to quantify the opportunity. So all of these are important steps for you to get specific on your idea. So let's take each of those steps within the pitch, right? First, let's start with the problem. So the problem space helps you to understand and identify who your customer is, what is the problem that they are facing, and why is it a problem for them. This is the first and the most important step in your journey. So the key for bringing an idea to life is that you should have a very clear understanding and a very good appreciation for your customers. You should understand who are your customers, what are they struggling with, and why do they need help. As long as you're able to help your customers, and as long as you're able to add value to their problem, to helping solve their problem, it's guaranteed that you will get to a good solution. So always focus on your customers, always focus on their problems, and think of how you can solve for those problems. And as part of that process, when customers find value in your solution, that's when your business comes to life. That's when you start making money. That's when you really scale your solution and help add value to your customers. So let's use the same example of the blind people in Kurdistan and having a solution to help those blind people, right? So if we are to identify the problem space of that pitch, who is your customer? So the customers are blind people, but that's at a very high level who your customers are. What would be very helpful is that you should try and break down the problem space as much as possible into smaller components. So when you're saying blind people, are you talking about partially blind people? Are you talking about fully blind people? Are you talking about colorblind people? Identify all the segments of your customers. So start at a broad level and then break it down further into smaller segments. Secondly, like, what's the problem they're facing? So they depend on others for their day-to-day activities. That's the problem you're trying to solve for your segment of blind customers, who could be partially blind, fully blind, or even color blind. And why is it a problem for them? This is very important to understand, because only if you understand your customer's problem space can you help define a good solution for them, right? So it's a problem for the blind people because they have to depend on others every day. And that means that for even small things like waking up, brushing their teeth, getting dressed up, like going outside, they need to call somebody always and ask for their help. So that's what makes it a problem for them. So it's a time-consuming process when they have to depend on someone else for their day-to-day activities. Second aspect is they lose their freedom because they don't have independence and they cannot do things on their own. And that also means they are low on confidence because they are not independent. So this is why it's a problem for them. And understanding this particular aspect about who your customers are, what's their problem, and why is it a problem for them is very important to get a good clarity on what's the problem you're trying to solve. The next step along the pitch is defining the size of the problem, right? So you identify that blind people, you want to help blind people. How big of a problem is it? Are you trying to help 5 blind people? Are you trying to help 20,000 blind people? Like, what's the size of your population that you're trying to solve for? So a simple approach, let's use the same example, is start by identifying the big population. So say, for example, there are 5 million people in Kurdistan. You start off with that premise, right? And you get that information from secondary research. Like you can go through research reports, you can go through academic studies, you can Google around to find out what's the market you are talking about. So you start with a population of 5 million people in Kurdistan. Say 2% of that 5 million population are blind. So that's That's your overall total market, which is 2% of 5 million is 100,000 people. Within that 100,000 people, it's possible that only 70% of that population uses some kind of technology. So say you want to help blind people with some kind of technology. That's what you're going after, right? So you break that 100,000 down into 70,000. So that's your available market. So although there are 100,000 blind people, only 70,000 people are available to you in terms of using some technology solutions. And within that 70,000 available market, say you're hoping that with the solution you can launch, you can help 50% of that market to start with. And any solution, when you launch it, a small number of people will start using it. Once they start finding value, they will spread the word to their friends and family, and the solution will start getting more popular, and more people will start using it. So although 70,000 people are available, you're not going to get all of those people start using your solution from day one. So say you make an assumption that year one, you can capture 50% of that market, and that brings your target market to 35,000 people. So that's the size of the problem that you're trying to solve for. The third aspect is the objective, which is you want to help blind people be independent. So the important thing here from an objective standpoint is the objective has to be at a very high level at this stage. You don't know, you have not spoken to your customers so far. You have not understood the details of how their day-to-day activities happen and what are the details of the challenges that they're facing. So unless you do that, you're still not ready to actually develop a solution. But you can still highlight your objective, which is you want to help blind people be independent. So the important thing here is you're saying what you want to do, which is you want to help blind people be independent. You're not saying how you are going to do that. You have not got there yet. And you will eventually get there after you conduct your research activities, which we will see in the subsequent section. And the fourth and the final component of a pitch is opportunity, which is your target market is 35,000 people. You start with a simple equation, which is your year one revenue that you're hoping to generate is say you can get $5 from every customer every year with this solution. And you can find that out from market research by understanding the competitive solution and what people typically pay for these kind of solutions, and get to an assumption, right? And there are 12 months in a year. So on a yearly basis, on year one, say you're hoping to make $2 million, which is 35,000 into $5 into 12. The important thing here is you're just trying to size the opportunity at a very high level. You're not looking for an accurate number. You're just looking at an approximate number, just to understand at a very high level, like what's the value of your solution and what are you hoping to, how valuable is your solution and what are you hoping to make with the solution, right? And you can make it the better your clarity of your assumptions, the better you can quantify the opportunity. So say based on your market research, 70% of the blind people are 50 years or above. Another assumption you could have made is that the product could be used twice a day, where the blind people use it to wake up every day and get ready for work, for example, right? And $5 a month is what is a reasonable price that they're willing to pay for this solution. And the other assumption is that there's a 5% growth from year one to year two, where you're assuming that more the people are able to find value with your solution, the more they're going to use it. So these are some high-level assumptions, and the better the quality of your assumption, the more clear you can be in terms of the problem you're trying to solve for. Just wanted to, so these are the key principles of the pitch. Keep it very short and very simple. You improve on your pitch as you progress, right? So you start off with a pitch, you talk to your customers, you gather more information, you can always come back and refine your pitch. So the pitch always keeps improving or refining based on the level of information you are collecting. You can customize your pitch to suit your audience. So all of you are in an incubator program, and your primary stakeholders would be your investors, where you're looking to get funding, right? So when you're talking to your investors and making a pitch, that's one version of the pitch. But when you're talking to your customers, you might want to probably simplify the pitch to tell them how you're adding value to them, right? So the pitch can look slightly different. So always customize it to suit who your audience are and whom you're talking to. And always, feel free to be bold and bring in your personality to the pitch. So the important aspect of a pitch is that you are affected by the problem, or you're seeing somebody who is close to you affected by the problem. So you're trying bring that passion and energy while you're making the pitch to show that you care very deeply about this problem space. I want to pause here briefly. Are there any questions, any comments or thoughts at this stage before we move on? I know this is a bit detailed at this step, so I just wanted to make sure like everyone is following along and you're all comfortable so far.
Ramki, there was a question that came from Muhammad Aziz a couple of minutes ago in the chat box, and it was about your Airbnb example. And the question was, is it possible to build a company like Airbnb with an innovative idea without taking in investors, but depending on small amounts of profit? Can it become big like Airbnb, basically? So I guess it's not really related to design thinking, but more a comment on Airbnb.
Could you repeat that question just to make sure I'm clear about it?
Sure. I think basically the question is like, can a company grow really big without external investment? And I'm also happy to answer if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. That helps. So the question, to summarize, is whether a company can go big without an external investor, right? And the answer is
yes.
Absolutely yes. Answer is
yes.
Absolutely yes. So it's a very interesting question. Thanks for asking that, Hamid, right? There are different ways from a funding standpoint. So one approach that we are all familiar with is we go to an investor, we tell them our idea, we do our research, we gather more information, and if the investor is interested in our idea, they might fund our idea and we can bring it to life. That's one approach that we are all familiar with, which is the venture capital model. The other idea is, the other approach is what we call as bootstrapping, which is you are an entrepreneur, you have an idea, you work on that, you start working on that idea with your own fund, which is called as a bootstrap. And as you gain more traction, as you build upon that idea, you can scale it with your own funds, or possibly go public or list it and get money from IPOs, where you list your company in the stock market and people invest in your company, and then you use that money to grow big, like the Airbnb example, right? So those are two broad paths. One of which is path one is you can go through an investor to scale your idea, or path two is you can start the idea with your own fund, which is the bootstrap, and then eventually scale it using an IPO. Does that help answer the question? Is that clear?
Muhammad says yes, thank you.
Awesome. And Patricia, you wanted to add something to that?
No, it's okay. You hit on the point well. I also think, we have Astara, our training manager, and Shwan, some of the rest of our team here. But I also think, sometimes you reach a point where you need larger amounts of capital. So, you might not be able to bootstrap it yourself, but I think it's such a good point, like if your company goes public or something like this. And I know some of these options are more limited in Kurdistan, but it's good to know like the strategy outside the region as well. We also had Kareem, for example, get acquired recently. So there's like a big injection of cash. So this is a regional example, I guess.
Yeah, that's the third part that I missed mentioning, which is if your company is interesting enough, it can also get acquired by some of the bigger companies. And that's again a very common thing that we see in US, where people develop companies and eventually sell it to some of the bigger companies. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Wonderful. I really appreciate these questions. Feel free to ask these questions as we move along. That really helps both me and all of you to kind of get better clarity on these concepts. Let's move along. So the step number 2. So we've gone through what is a pitch, what are the components of a pitch, and at this stage you have a clarity in terms of what is the idea you want to go after, right? Step number 2 is the research activity, and this is possibly one of the most important steps in developing your idea. What you do as part of the research step is that your goal of the research is to talk to your customers, understand what their pain points are, how do they go about on a day-to-day basis, and what are the challenges that they're facing currently, right? This is important because only if you are able to understand your customers' problems in a very deep and a personal way can you really help solve for those problems. So the goal of the research is to get clarity from a customer standpoint, develop that understanding for them, and then help define your problem better. So there are 4 steps to the research process. Step number 1 is an initial hypothesis. You start with an initial hypothesis. Step number 2 is you identify who your users are. Step number 3 is the primary research aspect, which is you do an end-to-end journey mapping based on talking to your customers and their feedback, and do some competitive research to understand the space you're dealing with. And the 4th and the final step is, based on all the conversations you've had with your customers, you break it down into simple insights or takeaways that will help influence your product. So let's go through each of these steps in the research with our example, right? I'll focus less on the theory part. I'll use the example to explain the concept a little more. I think that makes it simple. So the first step of the research is initial hypothesis. Hypothesis is an assumption, which is, if I do this, this will happen. That's the hypothesis. Like it basically is a starting point for your product. And what the hypothesis does is that it helps you get a good grounding on the problem statement to start with, and it helps you validate whether that's true or not. So you start with a hypothesis, you talk to your customers, and based on the customer conversation, you can either prove your hypothesis or you can disprove your hypothesis. So at that point, you might need to change your hypothesis if you learn something new based on your customer interaction. So in our example, like the blind customers, the hypothesis could be something like, if the blind customers can operate in a self-service mode, then they can save time. So we started with the problem that blind people need help on a day-to-day basis, and if we can provide them with a self-service solution, it'll help make $2 million, right? That was our pitch to start with. And now we are breaking that down into a hypothesis to say, if we are able to provide them a self-service mode, then they will save time. So this is the important thing here is we are getting a little into what our offering is, which is we want to provide an offering where they can use it on a self-service mode. They can use it on their own without needing help from others. And then it will help them save time. That's our hypothesis. The second step in the research process is break down the users. This is important because the more you're able to get clarity around who your users are, the better you can define the solution to help solve for their problems, right? So your user segment is a blind the blind people in Kurdistan. And the blind people can be fully blind, partially blind, or colorblind. Say those are the 3 segments you have identified. Within fully blind, you can further break it down to say, hey, the fully blind people comprise of children who are 18 years or below, adults who are 18 to 50 years and senior citizens who are 50 plus. The reason this is important is that the problem that a child who is, say, for example, 10 years old and is blind is facing is different from the problem that an old man who is, say, 70 years old and is blind is facing, right? They're not the same problems. So it's important for you to break down their user segment to as a small a segment as possible, so that while you're doing your research, you can talk to these independent segments and get a good understanding of what are the specific details of the problem they're facing. Once you have identified who your user, once you have identified your hypothesis and your user segments, the next step in the research process is what we call as a journey mapping. In journey mapping, what we really do is that we talk to our customers based on the segments we have identified, and we map their journey end to end. When we say journey, what we mean is that we identify how they are running their lives today, and what are the problems that they're facing today, right? That's important because you need to understand how things work as of today, as of right now for them, so that you can develop the right solution to help that. So this is just an example of our blind population. So say, for example, you talk to this segment of senior citizens who are 50 years or above and they're blind. You talk to them and you identify that today the way it works is that they wake up, they get ready, they have food, they have their medicine. So those are 4 important things that they do on a day-to-day basis, and they are very regular, right? You take each of these steps in the each of these current processes and you break them down into smaller steps. So for waking up, they need to locate where their alarm clock is. So they set their alarm at night. The alarm rings in the morning. They have to first locate where their alarm is. And since they are blind, it needs to be, they need to always keep it at one place and not change it at any time, because if they change it, they cannot find it. The first step is locating the alarm. The second step is they need to know what the current time is. This is important because to set an alarm, say I want to wake up at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning, I need to know that I need to set the alarm to 4 o'clock. And I also need to know what is the time right now. Say I'm setting the time at 9 o'clock at night. I need to know that, okay, if I set the time now, I will get 7 hours of sleep. So it's important to know what their current time is and what the wake up time would be. And then in the morning, once they wake up at 4 o'clock, when the alarm rings, they need to switch it off, right? So let's just get into the shoes of an old man who's 70 years old and who's trying to do this. All right. Today, like when they're setting their alarm, everything is display. It's in a display mode, right? If you're not blind, you just look at the time. You set, okay, I want to wake up at 4 o'clock tomorrow. You set it by pressing a few buttons, and then the alarm would ring at 4 o'clock. But for a blind person, they cannot see. They cannot see what the current time is, and they need help many a times to know, okay, what is the right time right now? It's 9 o'clock in the evening. What time do I want to wake up? I want to wake up at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. So they have to call somebody, make sure that they set it up for them, and then while waking up, if they're trying to switch off the alarm and if the alarm falls down or something, like they need again help for somebody to kind of make sure that it's switched off. So they have a lot of dependency with other people, because the way the alarms work today is that it relies on a visual experience where you have to see everything to do it. So the opportunity for improvement is that there could be a lot of ideas on how to make this better. Two ideas could be that there could be an audio playback, right? Where if you're trying to set if a person is 70 years old and they're blind, they're trying to set an alarm, then the alarm could play back to say, hey, like the time right now is 9 o'clock in the evening. Do you want to set an alarm then they can say, yes, I want to set an alarm. And then it could ask them, what time do you want to set an alarm? And they could say, I want to set an alarm at 4 o'clock. And then it could confirm back saying, hey, your alarm is set for 4 o'clock. Now imagine how simple this experience is compared to what they're doing today, right? They just have to speak to that device and everything will be done for them. But today's world, they have to rely on somebody else. They have to depend on somebody else to do all of that. That's one solution. The other solution potentially could be that they could do this in a Braille operated format, which is Braille is the language for blind people, where they can feel for the object and then they can do their operations based on that language. So you could also design an alarm possibly where somebody could touch and feel it and then do the right things to set the alarm for 4 o'clock the next day morning. So those are, again, that's not to say those are the only solutions. Those are some of the potential solutions. And the more you talk to your customers, the more ideas you will get. And a good idea, an interesting thing could also be that once you have some early concepts on how you can improve this, validate it with your customers. Always ask them whether it will be helpful for them. Because if you just simply talk to them, understand their problems, understand how they feel at every step, and go back to your office and define a solution without checking back with them, like it's a waste of time and effort, right? Like you might take back the solution and discover that it's not at all useful for them. So always take your customers along the process, check with them, ask them if it will be useful for them, ask them, hey, like what if you could do this, like would this be more helpful for you? Like always validate with them before actually going and building a solution. That'll save you a lot of time, energy, and money. So customers are important and feedback from them is very critical in your process. So we touched upon customer feedback. You could also do some competitive research to get a high level understanding of what are some of the other offerings that's available in the marketplace, and how do they work? What's the revenue that's typically generated by those solutions, and how big are those solutions, right? This is just to get an awareness around how is the space looking like in terms of the offerings out there, and how can you differentiate and make this better for your customers. That's the intent of the competitor analysis. And the final step is distilling the insight, which is after talking to your customers, after getting all of that feedback, you can come back and break that down into simple insights. So you could have spoken to a lot of blind people who are children, who are adults, and who are old people. And based on all that interaction, you could possibly say that, you know what, of all the blind people, close to 70% of them are 50 years or above. So when you're developing a product, probably that is the first segment you want to solve the problem for, because that's your biggest segment. And that's where most of the people will find value with your product. The other insight could be that based on your conversations, a lot of people struggle with setting an alarm or doing other activities because they are visually driven experiences, and they need, since they cannot see, they need help from somebody else to do all of that operations. And of all the use cases you discussed with them when you spoke with those customers as part of your interviews, you could possibly understand that a lot of people struggle with waking up and setting reminders. So that could be your most prominent use case, or the problem you want to go after to start with, right? And what this research step helps you to do is eventually understand who your customers are, understand their problem, and then break them down into clear insights that you can use while developing your products. I'll pause here briefly. Are there any questions you have as part of the research process, or any of the steps we covered before? Are we good to move forward? Okay. I'll take that to be a yes. And feel free to ask any questions as always, and we will pause and answer those questions. The third step. So just to summarize, you started with an idea. You converted that idea to a pitch, and you validated that pitch by doing your customer research. And now you have a good handle on the problem space. The next step is you want to actually build a solution that will help this problem space, right? I found this picture, which I thought was very interesting in terms of how do you actually build a solution. So look at the picture on the bottom segment where my mouse is right now. So that's one way to build a product, where you want to eventually build a car, but you start with small roller skates, right? Which has two wheels. So people, this is not in the context of our example. This is just a general example on how you go about building the product. So just don't confuse this with our blind people example. We'll get to that later. This is just an approach on how do you actually build a product. So if you have to build a car, you start with the small roller skates. The beauty is that roller skates as a product is usable, right? It has two wheels. People who know how to do this skates, they can use this. And then you evolve that roller skates into like a small, what we call as a scooter that the children play with, where it has again two wheels. But the interesting thing here is there is a handle where people can actually hold on to. So it provides a slightly more improved version of the roller skates, where the customer, like the person who's using it, has more balance right now. And then that you can evolve further into a bicycle where the wheels are bigger. The person can also sit in the bicycle, right? In this second scenario, for the small scooter, there is no way a person can sit, but for a bicycle, you can actually sit on it and ride. So it's an improvement over this version number 2. And from bicycle, you can evolve to a motorbike where you don't have to pedal. You can simply power it using the engine. And from in motorbike, 2 people can sit, whereas in bicycle, only 1 person can sit. And finally, from motorbike, you get to a car where 4 people can sit instead of 2. You don't have a handlebar, you have a steering wheel instead, and it's easier to operate compared to a bike, right? So this example is just used to bring across the point that this is how you should develop a product. You start simple. You start with the simple version of the product. You keep adding small features as you move along that makes constant improvement to your product, and at the same time keeps it usable. So the interesting thing here is that product 1, product 2, product 3, product 4, and product 5, all of these are usable at every stage. And customers always find value with this product. But look at this example where if you want to build a car, if you just start with a wheel, then you put 2 wheels, and then you put the frame, and then you build a car, the customer has to wait until the car is ready for it to be used. They cannot use product number 1, 2, and 3 in the example on the top. Whereas in the example at the bottom, they can use product 1, 2, 3, and 4 at every stage. So this is what we call as a minimum viable product, where you start with simple features. You build a very simple product, and then you talk to your customers all the time. You get inputs from them, and you keep making small improvements on this product, get it validated, and then keep improving it. So the advantage of this approach is that you save money because you're not building a car to start with. You're just starting with a small roller coaster wheel. Number 2, you save time because you started with a simple product, so it doesn't require so much time to build this product. And number 3, the product is usable at every stage, where you're able to get feedback from customers, and you're able to make sure that at every stage as you move along, like the customers can use that product and give you inputs. So this is how we should ideally approach a minimum viable product. So let's take the example of our blind people, right? We want to have a solution to help blind people. what's the minimum viable product for that? So based on all the research you conducted, uh, you might want to start with senior citizens because they are your biggest population, and this product you develop could be most useful for them. The second one is that you identify what's a primary use case, which is they struggle with a lot of things on a day-to-day basis, but the thing that they struggle most with is, for example, waking up every day using an alarm, because it starts their day on a very bad note that they have to depend on somebody for help. So that's probably the use case you decided to go after, right? So this is just example. So you have feel free to customize this for your specific problem you're trying to solve. Uh, the third step in the building part is the design phase, where your design should be simple, it should be easy to use, and it should be very intuitive, where you don't have to explain to customer how to use it. They should be able to understand it naturally. They should be able to get an idea of how to use it without being told how to use it, right? So in case of an alarm clock, if you have to design it for a visual person, visually challenged person, say you're trying to help them set the alarm for 4 o'clock in the morning, right? You could have a simple alarm clock where you have the hours and the minutes, and the hours are listed from 1 to 12. You have an AM PM button, and then minutes, you don't have to put all the way from 0 to 60 minutes, because that, for a minimum viable product, that's a very complicated thing. Probably when someone is trying to wake up and set an alarm, they're trying to do it in the intervals of 15 minutes. So they want to wake up at 4 o'clock, 4:15, 4:30, or 4:45. Those are the options, right? Like, so you have 0, 15, 30, and 45. And with the talkback solution we discussed earlier, they can simply set the alarm using these very basic options in terms of hours and minutes. That could be your early design to start with. And as we discussed earlier, like, once you do this design, make sure you take it back to your customers. You ask them if this is useful for them, and get input so that you are able to get a view into their needs and improve upon it. The third step is execution, which is the important step in execution. Is that, as we discussed, prioritize the most basic and the most fundamental use case, where you want to set an alarm with a voice playback. This is a simple metrics to help you prioritize the execution. So you might identify 5 or 6 different requirements on the concept of setting an alarm, right? This metrics, this model helps you map the customer value and the cost for developing that solution into like a small grid. So the first segment is, there is low customer value and the cost to develop is low. So for example, there could be a snooze option. Snooze means that the alarm rings at 4 o'clock in the morning. They don't want to say they're feeling very sleepy and they don't want to wake up. They can hit the snooze option or talk back with the snooze option to say, hey, call me, wake me up in the next after 30 minutes. That's called the snooze option, where you can postpone the time of the alarm at that point in time. That's a feature you identified, but based on talking to your customers, that has very low value because a lot of people don't use that feature, and also the cost to develop is low. So it could be easy to develop, but you don't want to do it because it's low customer value. The other segment is, there's a high customer value. So you want to set an alarm with a voice playback. That could be the most important use case you discover based on talking to your customers. So that has high customer value and the cost to develop is low. So it's a simple solution. You can define a voice playback option. A lot of customers have expressed interest in it and find value with it. That's the solution. That's the thing you want to build very first as a first step in your process. So going back to our example, like, that is your roller skates model, where someone can simply use this feature to wake up in the morning, and then you can improve on that feature and add more of these features as you move along in the process. Uh, that completes the build part of it. The fourth step is iterate, which is you want to, it's a repetition of the same process that we discussed earlier, where you build a small solution, you talk to your customers, you validate that solution with them, you improve that solution, uh, you measure how well that solution is doing, and you constantly learn. So iterate is nothing but the constant feedback mechanism where you build smaller and smaller, you build small version of the product and keep improving on it and constantly collect feedback. And the final step is scaling the product, which is as you keep doing the iteration, your product keeps improving along the process. So your product turns from a simple roller skates, it evolves into a simple scooter, it becomes a bicycle, it becomes a motorbike, and eventually you get to a car. That's scaling for you. So the important step as you keep scaling is that you keep focusing on the customer value, which we have highlighted. You identify things that doesn't add customer value and you outsource them, or you find other ways to manage that. So always work on like focus on on the features and focus on how you can improve those features, and keep your focus sharp to that. There could be a lot of activities, like for example, you have a big you have a small size company right now, you have 5 people who are working for you in that company, you want to pay salary to those people. So that could be like a payroll thing, which it has to be done, but you can rely on somebody else to manage that operation for you. Like you can outsource some of the activities, or you can seek help with some of the activities that doesn't directly add value to the customer, and still make that happen. And the final aspect around scaling is like always measure and improve. So we already touched upon this, where you constantly talk to customers, get feedback, and make improvements. So we are almost at the end of our presentation. So that's the 5-step process from a product development standpoint, where you take an idea, you evolve a pitch, which gives a clear definition of your idea. Just so these are the 5 steps, just to summarize it all again, which is you start with an idea, you go from idea to a hypothesis, idea to a pitch. Then you do your research, where you start with a hypothesis and you talk to your customers, get feedback, get inputs from them, understand their current pain points, and get some high level direction on the solution you're developing. The third step is you go on to build the product, where you actually start with remember the example where you start with the roller skates, build a scooter and build a bicycle, go to a motorbike and car. That's building for you. That's how you build a product, where you start small, keep adding in increments, get feedback, and then eventually get to a better product. That's the like you iterate on that model, and eventually you scale the model. So those are the 5 steps in the journey that we spoke about, to summarize. I also wanted to just take 1 or 2 quick minutes to walk through the monetization model. So what does monetization mean? Monetization means, how do you make money, right? So you solve a problem for the customer, but how do you actually make money from your product? There are different models on how you make money, and these are some examples on how those are used. So one is a transaction revenue model, where you make you talk to your customers, you understand their problem, you build a product that solves for that problem, and your customers will pay for that product because they find value in that product. That is what we call as a transaction revenue model. The second one is an ad-based revenue model, where you have a product, you will have advertisers. Like this is especially true if your product becomes fairly medium-sized or even at a bigger scale, right? So there could be a lot of advertisers who want to use your product and market their offerings to your customers. So for example, you're developing a product for a blind person and that product became a big success. There might be, for example, I'm just making it up. There could be, for example, a hospital or a clinic that could use your product to build awareness around surgery. Like they want to, they know that blind people use your product. They want to reach those blind people and offer them options to get out of blindness. Like they want to provide options around surgery or other treatments, right? So they could run ads on your product or your platform, and they will give you money to have those ads shown to your customers. So that's the ad-based model. The third one is a freemium model, what we call as a freemium model, which is you start with a product, you offer it free of cost to your customers to start with. Once more and more customers start using your product and they find value with it, then you start charging them a small amount. So the advantage in this model is that you build a good customer base very quickly because it's free of cost. No one has to pay to use your product for, say, for example, for the first 5 or 6 months. And once they start finding value, then they will start paying you for your product. So that's the freemium model. The fourth one is a subscription model, which is used mostly in the software industry, where you are paid on a monthly basis by your customers to use your product. And the fifth one is a sponsorship model, which is more of a donation-driven one. Are we familiar with Wikipedia? Patricia, if people are muted, is Wikipedia something used in Kurdistan?
Yeah, I think for the most part, people do use it, yes.
Okay. So Wikipedia is a very good example of the sponsorship model where the product is free. Anyone can use Wikipedia. But if you're interested, because you find a lot of value from the information you gather from Wikipedia, you can actually donate some money for that product. And they use that donation to keep that platform alive. So that's what we call as a sponsorship model, where it's driven by sponsorships. So those are different ways to make money. Again, this may not be super important earlier on in your process because you would be focused on identifying the problems, talking to your customers, and really define a basic version of the product. But this is something good to keep in your mind eventually, where you want to know how to make money out of your product and how to actually make this a successful business. This almost wraps up our presentation. These are the key takeaways. So there are many ways to solve a problem, right? And all of you are on a very interesting path along the problem solving journey. There are many ways to solve a problem. What I have outlined here is just one of the approach or a methodology. And this is not to say this is the only one. There are many ways and interesting ways to solve problems. So take this more as a guideline on how you go about solving a problem, and as opposed to taking it as a rule where this is the only way to solve a problem. This is a simple guideline or a framework you can use and validate to solve a problem. The second important thing is have a framework, but always trust yourself, right? So one thing which is very important for an entrepreneur or someone who's starting a business is you should trust your instincts a lot. Always talk to your customers, get facts, get data to solve problem, but also trust your instincts. Like do things that you feel is right, be bold, try new ideas, and most importantly, like make sure you're having a good time and having fun while you're doing this, because the entrepreneurial journey can be a difficult one. You might be faced with many challenges. You might not know on some days, how do I do this thing, or how do I solve for a problem? It's important to stay optimistic, like have belief in yourself, and pursue your goals, so that eventually, like, take one step at a time, keep moving forward slowly, and eventually, you will find yourself that there will be a good product that you have developed that a lot of people are finding value on. your customers are benefiting from your product, and your community is benefiting from your product. So that's pretty much what we wanted to cover today. We have, I think, close to 10 minutes available. I'll stop for any questions or inputs that you might have.
Thank you so much, Ramki. Does anybody have any questions or comments, or would like to maybe share their experience as they've started their business? Astara, I know you have the Ignite participants there with you, and they're all going through this process. So Ramki, we're streaming this in our co-working space, so there are more people watching than in the room. So if anyone has any feedback or questions, please feel free. You can unmute yourself or type in the box. Ramki, we can still see your screen, by the way.
Wonderful. Yeah. I'll keep it focused on this slide.
Sure.
Yeah.
And Zaid says, share the video URL. Yes, we'll do that. I'll send you guys the recording once we're finished. You have a lot of thank yous in the chat box, Ramki, just by the way.
Thank you so much. I really love talking to you. So even if there are some experiences or some problems you're trying to solve, feel free to voice it out. I'm also here to learn from you as much as I'm sharing.
Anybody? You have an expert here, so take your advantage. Zaid says, we hope to see you again in Iraq, Ramki. I think they want you back.
Thank you so much. That really makes my day today. Like that, I really love talking to you, and let me know how I can be of any help. I'm very interested in this space, and I'm very interested in helping solve problems for our customers. So if you have any questions, any comments, or any way I can help you, either over email or in person, like I'm all here for you. So just wanted to let you know that I'm available for you as a resource, and let me know how I can be of help at any point in time.
Thanks, Ramki. Two questions actually popped in. The first one is from one of our entrepreneurs who's in our co-working space now. There's a couple coming in. So the first one is, how long does it take to make the business profitable? The second one is, what do you think are the key things necessary to have a successful business? And the third one is, how can we contact you? So that's an easy one.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll take all of them. So let's start with the first question. How long does it take to make a business profitable? There is no one definitive answer for that question. It really depends on the problem you're trying to solve for, and how much value your customers are getting out of your solution, right? So let's break that down a little bit. What is profit? Profit means that you're making money. Your customers are finding value in what you're offering to them, and they're ready to pay you some money for using that offering. That's how you make profit, right? So in terms of how long it would take to make profit, it really depends on how much value your customers are finding in your product, and how well are they able to use your product, and how long are they using it. So as an entrepreneur, what I would encourage is that stay focused on your customers, because only if you help your customers solve a problem are they going to find value in your product. So stay close to your customers, talk to them, get their feedback on a constant basis, and make sure that at every step you're adding value to them. And revenue and profits would naturally come to you. You don't even have to try and make profit if you are doing the right things. The profit and revenue are just like outcomes of good processes you're following. So what I would always encourage is that stay focused on your customers and stay focused on their problems, and you might end up making profit pretty soon if you are to follow that. It depends on depending on how well your customers are finding that product useful. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Wonderful. The second question was that key things for the business. Could you repeat that question, Patricia? What are the key things for the business?
It says, what do you think are the key things necessary to have a successful business?
That's a very interesting question. Thanks for asking that. So the first and foremost thing necessary for a successful business is the focus on customer. So as we have been calling out throughout this presentation, your customers have to find value in your product. Your customers have to find your product simple and easy to use. It has to have a very simple design, and it should help solve their problems. So stay focused on your customer and develop a product in a simple and an iterative way by collecting feedbacks from them. And that's the first and the foremost thing necessary for a successful business, where the focus on the customer matters a lot. The second key aspect is that as an entrepreneur, you should stay grounded and you should stay positive. As we've been discussing, like there could be a lot of times where this journey could get hard and difficult. You might feel like quitting at some point. You might feel like, hey, like I'm getting to a dead end. Always stay optimistic, stay positive, and seek help from people wherever you need to. Like there could be somebody else who has approached that problem in a different way. So open up to people, talk to a lot of people, get a good perspective in terms of especially with your mentors, how would they recommend going about solving some of the problems, so that you're able to adjust appropriately. Always understand that you're not alone in this journey. Like a lot of people are here to help you, support you. So always seek out for help whenever you get bogged down or you get stuck. And the third and the most important thing is you should have a good time, have fun while doing this. Feel passionate about the problem you're trying to solve. Bring that passion while talking to your customers, while talking to other people whom you're working with, and all of that energy and your enthusiasm will translate to a good product. So those are the three things I would say. Focus on the customer, stay positive, and have fun. As far as my contact is concerned, you can reach me over email. I can. Would it be helpful, Patricia, if I can send you? You have my email contact.
Yeah.
Would it be helpful if you can pass that along?
Sure, I can send it to everyone with the webinar link. And Ramki, there's one question that's left, and I know we're running out of time, so maybe we'll make this the last one. But Mustafa is asking, how can he get a lot of people to know about his service and use it in a simple way and in a short amount of time? So maybe this is a bit about customer acquisition, marketing, I suppose.
Yeah. So thanks for asking that, Mustafa. That's again a very wonderful question. So your question, to summarize, is how do you get more people to know about your products, right? What a simple step to start with is what we call as a word of mouth, which is talk to your mentors, talk to people in 5-1 labs, and talk to your friends and relatives. Spread the word around your product, right? So have a lot of conversation with your friends and relatives and your peer circle to tell them what your product is, how does it solve a problem for your customer, and do that word of mouth. The other approach that you can parallelly use is rely on advertising. The way you could advertise is, depending on what your product is and who your customers are, identify what vehicle will be most beneficial to advertise. Say, for example, if you're talking, let's take the example we used throughout the case study, right? Which is, you have a solution, for example, to address the blind people. So what are the things that blind people interact with? Like, how can you really reach out to the blind people and tell them that you have these offerings? So, for example, one way to do that could be, you could go to the hospitals and talk to the hospitals to say, hey, specifically the eye department within the hospital, to say, you have this kind of a solution. How can you use their help possibly to create awareness around it? Or in this example specifically, like, probably advertising in newspapers would not help because they cannot read. But if there are blind people who are using braille services, or in educational institutions, if there are kids who are blind and they are taking help, go to the schools, go to educational institutions, go to colleges, and address those. Talk to your customers more often and tell them about your offerings, so that you're able to generate awareness around it. So use the right platform to create awareness around your product, depending on what is appropriate. Does that help answer, Mustafa? Is it helpful?
I can unmute him. Mustafa, your microphone is on if you have anything to add.
Hello?
No. Hi, Mustafa.
Hi, Mr.
Yes.
Hello, Mr. Atin.
Did that answer your question? Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, it's useful, and thank you to join us, and I hope to visit us in Iraq as soon as possible.
We hope so too.
Thank you, Mustafa. Thanks for your kind words.
Thank you, Ramki. I know we've gone over and it's a work day for you, so I don't want to keep you anymore, but thank you so much for taking the time. And I know it's early for you too, so thank you for waking up early to be with us. And as you can see from the group, you are most welcome in Iraq at any time. I think it's been many years since you visited, so we hope you can come see us soon.
I look forward to it.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. And I'll send across this presentation to you, Patricia, the final version of it.
And I'll send it to everyone. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye-bye, everyone.